Okay, good morning, everybody. So we are we're beginning the third Perek of Masechet Makkot. We've completed the first two Parakim. First Perek talking primarily, you'll remember, was about Eidim Zomamim. The second Perek was mostly about Arei Miklat. With a little bit of tangential details here and there. The third Perek is the reason the Masechet is called Makkot. This talks about Makkot, talks about Malkot. Now, the truth is there are two types of Onesh Malkot that we have. There's the classic Onesh Malkot, which is a punishment from the Torah. I mean, somebody transgresses a lav, somebody transgresses a mitzvah lo taseh, negative prohibition, which has no other punishments associated with it. Then the punishment would be Malkot. Right now, as we know, obviously these things are not practical. We'll get into the details of when and what and which kind of mitzvot are included, which kind of mitzvot are not included. Could a person be liable for more than one punishment? Under what conditions, etc. We know that none of these punishments are practically applicable today. And the truth is that even when they were practically applicable, many times they would not have occurred. We've discussed earlier already what happens when it comes to mitat beit din, right? And the conditions that are needed in order for that to take place. Any punishment from the Torah, there needs to be, first of all, there needs to be an azhara, which we'll learn about. Azhara, which is not to be confused with hatra'ah. Azhara means that it's written in the Torah. It's written in the Torah explicitly that there is a prohibition, which would carry a punishment. Again, if there is no punishment that is stated, then we assume, again, we're talking about lavim, we're talking about negative prohibitions. So we assume that the default punishment is going to be malkot, it's going to be lashes. If there is a punishment stated, so that would supersede. There are three types of other punishments we know about. There is going to be mitabidei shamayim, which is death in the hands of heaven. There is going to be karet, which is some sort of spiritual excision, right? Whatever that means, and which is also in the hands of heaven. And there's going to be mitat beit din, which is death in the hands of a human court, and the four types of mitot, skila, streif, hareg, v'chene. So those are the three. And then barring any of those, so we are left with malkot. I want to say again, people have this impression, people think, been a lot in the news recently as well. We're not going to get into politics at all. We stay very far away from that, always, especially in this year. But people have these thoughts and things about Medinat halacha and a halachic state. And what does that mean? It means you're going to be stoning people all day and giving people lashes all day. That's of course not what it means. The Torah does give us punishments for these different mitzvot to impress upon us, I believe, the seriousness of these things. Sometimes we take it to the other extreme. Sometimes we think, okay, a person can do whatever they want. You made a mistake. You're Mechalel Shabbat, okay, big deal. You are Oved Avodah Zarah, okay, big deal. No, it's a big deal. It's a big deal if you do the wrong thing. Does that mean you'll always be a practical punishment? No, but we need to understand that what Hashem wants from us. So the Mishnah is going to begin giving us a list of different mitzvot for which one would get malkot, again, assuming the conditions were in place. Sorry. So I started mentioning the conditions, and then I started talking about something else. So azhara means that it's listed in the Torah, the prohibition, the warning, and the punishment, if necessary. But then that is in terms of theoretically for that punishment to apply. In order for the punishment to then practically apply, we know there needs to be hatra'ah, which means there needs to be warning, and there needs to be edim, there needs to be witnesses about the action that's taking place. Now, hatra'ah, the warning which the witnesses give, has to be accurate. They have to say to the person, not only do you know that what you're about to do is forbidden, but do you know that you'll get the punishment for that? So they'll say, what you're about to do is, they see a person who's about to be Mechalel Shabbos, they'll say to him, do you know you're about to be Mechalel Shabbos? And if you are Mechalel Shabbos, the punishment will be skila. Punishment will be mitat beit din. Right? What happens if, we're going to discuss at the beginning of the Perek, what happens if the Eidim say to the person, do you know what you're about to do is forbidden, and the punishment is malkot? The punishment's malkot, but the punishment is actually mitah. Then what happens? So we'll discuss that. We'll see how that takes place. I'll also say, just by way of introduction, that and we'll learn the details as well, but not every negative prohibition, not every lav is going to carry with it necessarily malkot. The default position is that there will be malkot, and the Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvot lists he actually lists everybody agrees there are 613 mitzvot, right? How we classify them is machloket rishonim, but we have 248 positive mitzvot aseh and 365 mitzvot lo taseh. So the way the Rambam counts it, he says of those 365, he lists 207 mitzvot lo taseh for which one would get Makkot. So that is the majority of them, but there are certain categories, and we've come across some of these already. We have, for example, there's a category of a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. Lav she'ein bo ma'aseh means where you have a negative prohibition, you've transgressed something without an act. We'll see exactly what that is, without a specific action. So, for example, somebody had chametz in their home over Pesach. They didn't do anything actively to go and buy their chametz, but they didn't go and they didn't destroy it. That would be a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, for example. Now, the general rule is for a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, where there is no action, one would not get malkot. Another category is what's called a lav shenitak la'aseh, meaning where I have a negative prohibition, but it is nitak, it is rectified, it is connected to a positive mitzvah. So, for example, the Torah tells us that we're going to talk about notar in our Mishnah. We're going to talk about if you have a korban that has to be consumed within a certain amount of time, and it was not consumed within that amount of time, you are no longer allowed to eat it. That is notar. You aren't allowed to leave it over. But if you leave it over, you would have to go and burn it. So you have a negative mitzvah of leaving it over, but this applies by the korban pesach. But if you do not consume it within that time, so then you have a mitzvah aseh to go and burn it. Or, for example, somebody steals. If somebody steals, that is obviously a negative prohibition. Which, by the way, somebody pointed out to me this weekend. We just read the Aseret HaDibrot, Lo Tignov. Lo Tignov there is not actually referring to stealing property. It's referring to kidnapping, Gonev Nefesh. But in any event, somebody steals, that is a separate prohibition. There is a positive mitzvah to return, Ve'shivet HaGzeilah, to give back that which you've stolen. So that would also be a lav shenitak la'aseh. It's a negative mitzvah, and then you have an aseh that is connected. Okay, so those are some of the principles, some of the details we'll be looking at. Let's now go into our Mishnah. So we're on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. It's the beginning of the third Perek, as we've said, and the Mishnah begins with a list. Ve'elu hein. Now we find this many times in Shas. Ve'elu hein. You have a list of different things. For example, the Gemara in Mishnah and Kritot. Right, this is Masechet Makkot. Masechet Kritot, as you can guess, talks about those things for which one gets correct. And there it lists all the mitzvot, or all the prohibitions for which one would be subject to karet. Here, it's going to be very difficult for us to list all the mitzvot. I mean, it would be possible if the Mishnah wanted to, but to list all the mitzvot, all the lavim for which one would get malkot, as we said, according to the Rambam, that is 207. I'll give you a spoiler. The Mishnah here does not list 207 lavim. There's a lot, but not quite that many. So why these ones and not all of them? So both Rashi and Tosfot tell us, and maybe we'll see it inside shortly, but they tell us that those which are listed here, there's going to be some sort of a chidush. There's going to be some sort of a chiddush. So we're not listing every single lav which one would get a malkot, but these might be the ones that you might think that one would not get malkot, but you still would. So that's what the Mishnah says. It says Eilu hein halokin. These are the averot over which one would get the onesh of malkot. So it's going to bring us a few different categories. The first category the Mishnah will bring has to do with Isurei Arayot. It's to do with forbidden sexual relationships, right? So habal achoto, v'alachot aviv, v'alachot imo, v'alachot ishto, v'aleshet achiv, v'aleshet achi aviv, v'al hanida. So for all of these isurim, one would get malkot. So habal achoto with one's sister, v'alachot aviv, one's father's sister, alachot imo, mother's sister, alachot ishto, wife's sister, v'aleshet achiv, the wife of his brother, v'aleshet achi aviv, the wife of his father's brother, v'al hanida, and with a woman who is nida. So why does the Mishnah come now and teach us? And then a few more. Almana la kohen gadol, an almana, a widow who with the kohen gadol. The kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana. This is different to a kohen hediot. A Kohen Ediot, an ordinary Kohen, can marry an Almana, but there's a special limitation on the Kohen Gadol. And a Grusha and Chalutza, which is even with a Kohen Ediot, right? A Grusha, a divorcee, or a Chalutza who has undergone Chalitza, may not marry a Kohen either. And then continues the Mishnah, Mamzeret u'netina l'Yisrael, bat Yisrael l'natin v'le mamzer. Right. So another category is if you have a mamzeret or a netina. So a mamzer or a mamzeret is the child of one of the forbidden marriages, one of the forbidden relationships, over which there would be karet. And a netin or a netina is not something we have today, but these are descendants of the Givonim. And so for Yoshua, we have the story of the Givonim, who were one of the nations around in Eretz Canaan, and they came and they lied to Yoshua. They pretended they'd come from a faraway land and they were somewhere from somebody else. And they came and and based on their lie, they made a brit with Yoshua. And then because they'd already made the brit, so Yoshua did not expel them completely. He said, no, they can come, they can stay, but they would be chotvei tzim v'shavei mayim. They would be wood choppers and water carriers, etc. They would have a bit of a lower status. So their descendants also have a similar status to mamzerim, who for a certain number of generations are not allowed to marry within the kahal. So in all these cases, says the Mishnah, one would get Makkot. Now, why does it have to teach us specifically these cases? So the Chiddush is, and the Gemara will talk about it, that certainly the first group is that where you have the first group here in the Mishnah of Abal Achotov, Alachot Aviv, Alachot Imo, etc., is that these are Isurei Karet, that there is already a punishment of Karet, and nonetheless, it tells us that one would still get the punishment of Malkot as well. The Gemara will talk about, say, this is going to be a Machloket Tanaim. Not every Tana will agree, and therefore the Gemara will ask, who is the Tana of our Mishnah, who holds that one could have Karet and Malkot at the same time. So let's just see Rashi. Rashi says, Elo hein alokin. He says, Elo lav dafka. There's also a question about the Girsa. Is it Elu or Ve'elu? Right, connects to our parasha as well. Rabbi Wine spoke about it yesterday, right? Ve'elu hamishpatim. But in any event, our Mishnah says Ve'elu. Rashi seems to have a Girsa of just Elu without the Vav. He says Elu lav dafka. It doesn't mean just these. Meaning, when we have this list that says Ve'elu ein alokin, we might have thought these are all the transgressions for which one gets Malkot. Rashi tells us, no, don't worry, it's not all of them. Elu lav dafka tatana v'shiyeh. Because it was taught and it left out some of them. There are more left over. The Tana v'Shia look in Tuva. There are many cases that are not listed here. Elatana chayavei kritot, but it taught us those lavim which are chayavei kritot. Lashmoinan deyesh malkot b'chayavei kritot. But in order to teach us that yes, you could have malkot and karet at the same time for the same transgression. And then he explains that not every case in the Mishnah is going to be chayav karet. There are going to be other cases, and why are those listed here? So, for example, continues Rashi, Tana almana ugrusha. Why did it teach us in the Mishnah the case of an almana for a kohen gadol and a grusha with a kohen ediot? Lashmoinan almana grusha chayav alea mishum shtei shemot. Okay, we're going to see, we haven't read that line yet in the Mishnah, but there's going to be a special din. What happens if there's a woman who is both an almana and a grusha who is married with the kohen gadol? Then he is going to be chayav there for both of those. So that is a chiddush that the Mishnah wanted to teach us. V'tana, and it continues. We'll see as we continue the Mishnah. Tevel u'maser rishon shelo nitla trumato. Okay, why is it going to teach us the case of Tevel and the case of Maaser Rishon? We'll explain this in a moment, because those are cases whereby the Lo Mefaresh Lavti Du Behedya, because their lav was not taught explicitly. It was not taught explicitly in the pasuk. V'chein hekdesh shelo nifda, and the same thing regarding hekdesh, which was not redeemed. And then once it teaches us those, many times the Mishnah groups together. Once we have Tevel and Maaser Rishon and Hekdesh, so it's going to group together cases of Maaser Sheni and other cases like that, which we'll see shortly. So it says Rashi, the Tana Hekdesh, Tana Maaser Sheni. Once it's taught Once it teaches us about Hekdesh, teach us about Maser Sheni as well. Behedia the Tavayu Malkot. Even though Maser Sheni is written explicitly, the Tavayu Malkot Yidu Mishum Mechusarei Pidya V'chen Beruban Yesh Davar Chadash. Okay, so we'll see shortly what the Chiddush is precisely regarding Hekdesh and Maser Sheni, but that's the bottom line. Says Rashi, Chen Berubo Yesh Davar Chadash. In the majority of these things which are mentioned in the Mishnah, there is something new. Tosfot says similarly, and Tosfot learns a little bit differently to Rashi in terms of what each Chiddush is going to be. But if you see Tosfot, he says, etc. He says as well, Tana V'Shiur. The Tana taught us this list, but he left some out. Sheshimesh Zar. For example, if you have a Zar, a non-Kohen, Tameh Sheshimesh. You have somebody, a Kohen who was Tameh and went in to do the Avodah, the Mikdash. Or Zar, She'achal Truma, a Zar, a non-Kohen, a Truma, which is forbidden. Uba'amum Sheshimesh, or a Kohen who is a Ba'amum, who also can't do the Avodah. Onen, Makriv, Mazia, Choshen, Mechabeg Achelet, Al Gabe Maracha, etc. So, why specifically Tosfot chooses to give us all these examples from the Mikdash, but those are the examples which he gives. He says, Ela, Tosfot in the fourth line, he says, Ela lo chashiv lave grede, Ela bo'otan sheyesh bein chidush. He says, so this is not all the lavim for which one will get karet, but these are the ones, as Rashi said, where there is going to be a chidush. There is some sort of novelty about the fact that one gets malkot over here. And it's teaching us these cases whereby there is karet, but not where there is mitat beitin. Lashmoin and afagav deika karet lokin. That's the point that this Tana wants to teach us. Even though you could get karet, you would still get malkot for these transgressions. For those ones, we don't need to find anything new. We don't need to find any chiddush. The fact that you get karet and malkot, that is chiddush enough. We don't need to look for a chiddush in these ones which is taught. Contrast that refers to Rashi. He says, you'll see that Rashi tried to find a chiddush for all of these. And the last one, the case of Almanah for a Kohen Gadol, that's because, as Rashi explained as well, we've got the case of an Almanah and Grusha is going to be chayav for both of those. Okay, so the first group of lavim we have are the ones we get malkot, and there would already be karet, but there would also be malkot. And then the Mishnah told us Almanah leKohen Gadol, Grusha v'chalutza leKohen Idiot, and Mamzer Tenatina Israel, but Israel Tinvele Mamzer. So now we are in the fifth line of the Mishnah. The fifth line of the Mishnah says now what we've just seen in Rashi and Tosfot. It says Almanah v'Grusha chayavin alea mishum shtei shemot. So if there is again, we're talking here, there was a Kohen Gadol, and there was a woman who was both an Almanah and Grusha, meaning her first husband died and her second husband got divorced, they were divorced. So since those are two separate prohibitions, the Chiddush, even though it's with one act, but there are two separate prohibitions which are both written explicitly in the Torah, and therefore the one transgressor would be chayav twice, and that would be two sets of malkot. Right, Rashi says over here, you see Rashi where he says Almanah ugrusha, says shenit Almanah meish echad v'nit gasha meish acher. Right, so she was widowed from the first husband and divorced from the second, somebody else. Chayav alea shtei malkot mishum shtei shemot, would be chayav malkot twice because it's two different things. Mishum shtei azharot, because there are two different, as we said, there are two different azharot. Since both of these are explicit in the Torah and both of them have the azara relating to each one, therefore there will be two sets of malkot. That would be different, however, to the following case, which is the Mishnah. So we said, Almanah grusha chayavin alea mishum shtei shemot, grusha v'chalutza eino chayav ela mishum echad bilvad. But if somebody is both a grusha and a chalutza, so there would only be one set of malkot. Right? It says Rashi, grusha v'chalutza, grusha v'hi chalutza, she was divorced and she was a chalutza as well. Eino chayav alea ela mishum grusha. The Makkot would there only be for grusha. Shachalutza eina ktuva. It's not written explicitly regarding chalutza. That is only learned out from a ribuy. Ela me ribuya maitinanda. From the extra word, there's a drasha in the pasuk, and therefore it's learned out. The Tanya beKiddushin says Rashi. We learn this in the Gemara in Kiddushin, where it says grusha. How do we know? So we know that the Kohen can marry a grusha. How do we know a chalutza as well? Talmud lomar ve'isha. From the fact that it says ve'isha, that is in the pasuk. I don't think you have the pasuk here in front of you, but that's what it says in the pasuk. It says that the Kohen cannot marry a grusha. It says Amana grusha Eloika. That is the pasuk regarding the Kohen Gadol, and regarding the Kohen Idiot, it says it just mentions grusha explicitly, but it says the word isha. From there, we learn that includes the chalutza as well. Okay, so that is the first set of lavim which the Mishnah teaches us. Now, past the 2 dots, we have another group, some more examples of lavim for which one will get Makkot. So hatameh she'achal et hakodesh, right? Somebody who was tameh, who ate kodesh, ate from the korbanot, right? One who is tameh is not allowed to go into the mikdash. They're not allowed to eat from the korbanot. So too, one who comes into the mikdash in tumah, just entering, that in itself is going to be a prohibition. Rashi points out, we're going to learn in the Gemara precisely what the azara is for that case. It doesn't mean one ate all 4 at the same time, but when we ate any of these four prohibitions of achila, of eating, these are all foods which one is forbidden from eating. So chaylev refers to certain forbidden fats, certain parts of meat, parts of the animal, which one cannot eat. The Gemara in Chulin discusses exactly which chaylev is mutar and which chaylev is forbidden. Dam, right? We're not allowed to eat blood. And notar and pigul, very interesting. This refers to the korbanot. So we said each korban has got a certain amount of time during which it can be consumed. If it is left over, the word notar literally means left over. If it's left over beyond that time, then it can no longer be eaten. If one eats it beyond the permitted time, that would be a prohibition, and for that one would get Makkot. By the way, we're coming up to Pesach, so the whole sugya of Hechsher Kelim is going to come up, and it's going to be very relevant. So a lot of the dinim of Hechsher Kelim are learned from 2 places. One is learned from the war with Midian afterwards, when Bnei Israel took the spoils and the Kelim had to be kasher because they'd been used for non-kosher foods. The other place where it's learned from is in the Mikdash, because they had all sorts of kelim in which they would use bowls, etc., which they would use for the korbanot. And once the meat had been cooked and had been in those vessels, in those kelim, once we get to the time where the korban can no longer be eaten, whatever's left over from it is then notar, still left over, which is forbidden for consumption. There is also, as we know, whenever we cook food, there is a taste of the food which is absorbed into the pots or absorbed into the bowls. That's why we have to have separate pots for meat and milk and separate plates, etc. Because there's a tama balua bakli. So once the tam is already absorbed into the kli, once 2 days, 3 days have passed, whatever taste is left inside is now going to be notar. And that means that you can't, unless you kasher that vessel, you're not going to be allowed to use it again. So the Gemara discusses in Tzvachim and other places in terms of what was done, what was required in order to kasher those vessels and use them again. We learn a very, very interesting halachot from the comparison of notar versus non-kosher food, and it's very relevant coming up to Pesach for what's called the Gemara in Avodah Zarah talks about Isura Bala or Hetera Bala. And one day when we learn Avodah Zarah, we'll discuss that as well. But in any event, so that is notar. Now, pigul is even more interesting. So if notar is whereby one had the korban left over after the time when one is no longer allowed to consume it, pigul just goes on thought alone. Pigul means that the Kohen, when he is performing one of the avodot of the korban, has in mind that he is going to eat it, or has in mind that he's going to use this korban after the time when he's allowed to. meaning he has in mind that he's going to let it become notar. Just having that thought when performing the action of the korban, that already disqualifies it. So notar is where in practice it was left over. Pigul, it wasn't left over, even if in practice everything gets eaten before the time, and there is no notar. No, the moment he's had that thought, already in thought, that can disqualify it. So somebody who eats one of those categories, or chelev, or dam, or notar, or pigul. Okay. Or pigul v'tameh. And if it's the korban has become tameh as well, it has to be kept in tahara. Once it becomes tameh, it has to be burnt. Then, if one would eat it there as well, that would be forbidden. Avashochet u'maleh bachutz. Somebody who does a shchita and of the korban bachutz outside of the mikdash, that is forbidden as well. V'ha'ochel chametz b'Pesach. Now these examples, which are not in the mikdash, which are a bit more familiar, hopefully not familiar in practice, but familiar in theory. Ha'ochel chametz b'Pesach. Somebody who eats chametz on Pesach. Now we know that is also carries with it an isur karet, but that would also be Makkot. Va'ochel va'oseh melacha b'yom kippurim, and somebody who eats or who does melacha on Yom Kippur, again, he's also Isurei Karet, for which one would also get Makkot. V'mefatem et hashemen, v'mefatem et haktoret. Mefatem means, like we have pitum haktoret, somebody who would produce an imitation of the shemen, of the oil which was used for the mikdash, or of the ktoret, of the spices. V'asach b'shemen hamishcha, somebody who anoints themselves with the shemen hamishcha. We spoke in the second Perek about the kohen hamashach b'shemen. You remember? We spoke one of the ways the kohen gadol was invested was with the anointment of oil, not just the kohen gadol, but also others. Also the kelim in the mikdash we used the shemen. So if somebody makes that shemen, or somebody anoints themselves with that shemen, that is an isur for which would carry malkot. Okay, so let's just look at Rashi on those examples that we've seen till now. So Rashi says, we saw about 3-4 lines up from before the long lines in Rashi. He said notar, that which is left over. Now for all of these, Rashi is either going to explain, we need to understand why they're listed in the Mishnah, and we need to understand what's the so it could be the previous examples where we said where there is an isur of karet. That's why the Mishnah tells us as well that even though it's got a karet, it's got malkot also. All of these examples, why would we have thought perhaps that they shouldn't be included in the list? So maybe the azhara is not explicit or is not obvious in the Torah, and that's what Rashi is telling us. No, where that azhara is there, or maybe if it's learned out from a riboy, etc. You might have thought it's not explicit, and there would be no malkot here, but in fact there is. So he says notar. Regarding notar, says Rashi, ktiv bei v'sarafta ta notar ba'esh lo yachel ki kadoshu. Right? It says regarding notar, you will burn it. You will burn it in fire. So again, what you see is this is actually a lav shenitak le'aseh, and that's why we would have thought there would be no issue of malkut here. But shlo yachal ki kadoshu v'azarat pigul nami mehacha. The azhara of pigul is learned also from where it talks about notar, because it says ki kadoshu. What does it mean? Ki kadoshu klomar mipnei shehu kodesh shenifsal. Meaning, any time we have kodesh which was disqualified. Lamadnu mikan kol sheba kodesh pasul ba katov litein lo taseh al achilato. Anything which was disqualified in the kodesh, the pasuk here is adding a lav, is adding a lo taseh for eating it. V'ach yamer nakaman v'azarat tameh v'basar shelo yiga b'chol tameh lo yochal. We have a similar limud later on regarding basar tameh. Okay, the next example was vashochet, somebody who is shochet kodshim bachutz. Right, we know that we have shechita all the time of meat, of basar chulin, but here I was talking about somebody who does the shechita of kodshim, of a korban, but outside of the mikdash. Shechita, by the way, is one of the avodot that is kshera bazar. The later avodot of the korban all have to be performed by a kohen himself, but shechita could be performed by a non-kohen as well. Azarat Azharat Ma'alai, Sham Melacha Pentaleh V'gomer. So that is somebody who tries to offer up the korban outside. That pasuk is warning one against that. Azharat Shochet. Where do we find the Azhara for Shochet itself? Yalfinan Bezvachim Perek Shochet V'Maleh. That's in the Gemara over there in Zvachim. Ika Deyalef Nilo Yizbechu Od V'gomer Ika Deyalef La Migzera Shava. So there are those who learn it out from a pasuk that says Lo Yizbechu Od, and there are those who learn it out the Azhara from a Gzera Shava, from the word Hava'ah, which is brought both regarding in the pasuk regarding one who is Shochet and regarding one who is Ma'aleh. Okay, regarding eating on Yom Kippur, also it says Rashi, Yalif Azharatei bePerek Batra de Yoma. There we learn out the Azhara in the Gemara in the last chapter of Yoma. Hamefatem et hashemen. What does that mean? I'll say shemen bedugmat shemen hamishcha. One who makes oil. Who makes olive oil specifically to imitate the shemen hamishcha. V'zarateu v'matkunto lo tasu kamohu. That's the pasuk that says matkunto lo tasu kamohu. That is the azhara for that. V'chein b'ktoret, and also regarding the incense, we have a similar pasuk matkunta lo tasu lachem. Continues Rashi, Asach b'shemen hamishcha, one who anoints themselves with shemen hamishcha, me'ato she'asa Moshe b'midbar. We had shemen hamishcha, which was made by Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert. Tichtiv al basar adam lo yisach. That is telling us that you can't anoint with that. Okay, so that is our second category of lavim. Like we said, many of them to do with the mikdash and tuma and tahara. And we mentioned Ochel Chametz for Pesach and Oseh Melacha Yom Kippurim as well. Now we have a few more isurim regarding eating. Continues the Mishnah as follows: Achal tevel u'maser rishon shelo nitla trumato, u'maser sheni ve'hekdesh shelo niftu. So somebody who ate tevel. Okay, so again, we'll just give a quick recap, a quick background regarding Trumot and Ma'asrot. We know a person has their grain, has their produce from the field. That is called tevel. Tevel means that nothing has been separated from it. The first thing which a person has to separate then is truma, or what's also known as truma gdola, which goes to the kohen. That has to be kept b'tahara. That can only be eaten b'tahara. That's why nowadays, right, we still separate truma, but we don't give it to the kohen. We just have to dispose of it in a respectful way. And the only place where we still can use truma nowadays is when you have truma of oil. You could use that for burning Hanukkah candles, etc. So the first section that's taken away is truma gdola, and that can be any amount from the Torah. Then you have Maser Rishon. Maser Rishon is the 10th, which is given to the Levi. Now, from the Maser Rishon, the Levi has got to give a portion of that to the Kohen. That is what's called Trumat Maser. So we have Truma Gdola first. That's why it's called Truma Gdola, because then you have the Maser Rishon, and removed from the Maser Rishon is also Trumat Maser. Then you have, depending on which year you are in the cycle, right? If it is year 1, 2, 4, or 5, you have Maser Sheni, which we discussed in the previous Perek, right? Maser Sheni, which has to be eaten B'Kedusha in Yerushalayim, or it can be redeemed. It can be redeemed over money, and then it can be eaten in Chulin, but that money has to be brought to Hekdesh. And in the 3rd or 6th year, you just have Maser Ani, where the second tithe is given to the poor. And of course, in the Shemitah year, there is no tithe. Okay, so somebody who ate tevel. Tevel mean before Truma and Maser has been taken, that would be prohibited. U'Maser Rishon shelo nitla trumato. So too, Maser Rishon, before the Trumat Maser has been taken away from it, that is a similar status to tevel as well. U'Maser Sheni ve'hekdesh shelo nifdu. Okay, so both Maser Sheni or Hekdesh, meaning anything which is Hekdesh, which has been dedicated to go to the Beit HaMikdash, that can't be eaten, that can't be benefit from, unless it's been redeemed. So Maser Sheni or Hekdesh shelo nifdu, that is an Isur Lav, and that is an Isur Lav, and that is going to carry Makkot as well. So now says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Kama yochel min hatevel v'hei chayav. What amount does one need to eat? You're saying that you're getting lashes for eating. So what amount of tevel would one need to eat in order to be chayav malkot? Very important. The Mishnah mentions the language, it says v'hei chayav. It does not say how much you have to eat that would be asur. We have a machloket in the 8th Perek of Yoma between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding chatzi shiur. And we paskin that chatzi shiur asur min Torah. Means whenever we talk about amount and a minimum amount for which one would be chayav, that's for which one would get the punishment. But if one ate less than that, it would still be forbidden from the Torah. That is from the principle of chatzi shiur asur min Torah. But what is the shiur in terms of chayav malkut? So Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol Shu. V'chachamim omrim kazayit. So we have machloket tanaim. Rabbi Shimon says, however much you eat, any amount, for that would already be forbidden. Everybody would agree that it would be forbidden. But according to Rabbi Shimon, that amount you'd be chayav already. And Chachamim say no. Chachamim say you'd only be chayav once you ate a kazayit. So Amala and Rabbi Shimon, says Rabbi Shimon, do you not to Chachamim? Do you not agree with me that if one was to eat an ant, right, whatever size it was, an ant is probably smaller than a kazait or any other insect for which one would be chayav malkut, then one would be chayav malkut. Do you not agree with me? So that is based on other places, other gemarot, which seem to indicate that very strongly. So he says, Amrulo mipnei shehi kibriyata. So they say no. Over there it's different. Over there with an ant or an insect which you ate, even though it's smaller, because that is a bria. That is the way it is created. That is a full creation. That is why, by the way, we're so makpid when it comes to fruits and vegetables, checking fruits and vegetables, for insects and bugs and washing, etc. You might say, well, what's the problem? Even if there is something there, it's less than a kazayit, and why should that be forbidden? So first of all, as we've mentioned, that even less than a kazayit, it may not be chayav, but it would still be asur. But second of all, if it is a whole creature, so that would be chayav, even if it's less than a kazayit. And that's the reason why we are so stringent on these things. It's also the reason why when something has been cooked or has been crushed, for example, there's certain fruits, once they've been crushed and made into yogurt and things like that, so then we are more lenient, because in such a case, if there might be, let's say that there was, obviously you have to wash it and you have to do your best to get rid of the insects first. But let's say there was an insect inside, and then it was, once it's been crushed up, it's not a bria anymore. It's only a part of it, and then you would then have the laws of batel b'shishim, which would apply. Obviously, there's a sugya here of ein mevatlin isur l'katchila, which means if I'm taking something and trying to create a bittul for the sake of bittul, I'm not allowed to do that. Right? If I have a big pot of chicken soup and I want to add a little bit of milk because I think it tastes very nice, and then I make sure that I have 60 times more of the chicken soup beyond the milk, that would be completely forbidden. That's bitul isur l'katchila. But where it happens inadvertently, or where the poskim discuss, if somebody is grinding or crushing that fruit because that's the way you would eat it, you're not doing it for the sake of being mevatel the isur, so then there might be what to talk about. But in any event, what we see from here is that if it's a bria, so then Chachamim agree that yes, there you would be chayav. So Rabbi Shimon says, so you say that about a bria, I'll say the same thing about wheat. He says, Amar lahen, af chita achat kivriyata. Even if you have one grain of wheat, that's the way it was created. That should also have the din. So the bottom line is that Rabbi Shimon says that any amount of tevel which one eats, one would be chayav for, one would be chayav malkut. And Chachamim disagree. Chachamim say that no, the chayav malkut would only come from the amount of a kazayit, but less than that not. But it would still be an issur. Okay, so that is the list. Those are some of the. We'll carry on in the next Mishnah as well. These are some of the isurim, some of the lavim for which one would get malkut. Now the first group were all sorts of isurim for which one gets malkut, but one also gets karet. So says the Gemara asks the question. I'll just read it and we'll pick it up from there again tomorrow. It says chayavei kritot katani, chayavei mitot beitin lo katani. So our Mishnah lists, the Tanna of our Mishnah lists for malkut those things for which one gets kritot, but he does not list those things for which one gets mitat beitin. So matnitin mani, whose opinion is this? Which Tanya is the author of our Mishnah? It's Rabbi Akiva here. This is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya, we have a brighter that says, Echad chayavei kritot, ve'echad chayavei mitot beitin, yeshno bichlal malkot arba'im, divrei Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael holds that it could be actually that isurim for which one gets karet or for which one gets mitat beitin, one could still get malkut for. Rabbi Akiva Omer, chavei kritot yeshno bichlal malkot arba'im. And Rabbi Akiva says no. Rabbi Akiva says those things for which one gets karet would be included for malkot, because she'im asu tshuva beitin shomala mochalinahen, because one could do tshuva and beitin shomala would forgive you, meaning you would no longer be subject to the punishment of karet. However, chavei mitot beitin eino bichlal malkot arba'im. Those things for which one gets mitat beitin would not be included for malkot as well, because once somebody has been found to be chayav mitat beitin, doesn't matter how much tshuva he does. If he's had a gemar din, the beitin would have to execute. Okay, we'll stop there and we'll pick it up tomorrow.
Yashikoch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Everybody, have a great day.